Right, so we are going to start now. Ayubowan, good evening, bonsoir. We warmly welcome all the participants for this literary discussion. The topic today is the translation of French literary work into Sinhala with the theme, Bringing Home the Cultural Otherness. This literary discussion is organized by the Sri Lankan Association of past students in France in collaboration with the Alliance Française de Kotte, the official French language and cultural center in Colombo. This session is open for all, but we can only accept 100 participants, so please bear with us. To commence the session officially, I cordially invite our president, Mrs. Shevanthi Samaravira, to deliver the welcome speech.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I warmly welcome all of you for our literary discussion session, Bringing Home the Cultural Otherness, translation of French literary work into Sinhala, which gives an opportunity to read French novels in our own language, Sinhala, that can change the perception of the general public who are interested in French culture. So today we proudly present this virtual session through the Sri Lankan Association of Past Students in France, ASLAEF, with the collaboration of the Alliance Française de Kotte in Colombo. So we have got the best resource person to talk about this subject. So I invite Professor Niroshini Gunasekera, Senior Professor of French in the Modern Language Department of the University of Kelaniya, to elaborate on this topic. Niroshini, I warmly welcome you. And also I welcome Professor Sarath Amunugama, our Vice President, the moderator of this session. It's a great pleasure to see all of you through this virtual session in spite of your busy schedules. You are here today to make this event a success and gain and expand your literary knowledge. I warmly welcome all of you. Hope you will get the full benefit out of this interesting session. Thank you.
Right. Thank you very much, madam. Now we move on to the discussion. To start with, we would like to provide a brief introduction to our speaker, Senior Professor Niroshini Gunasekera. So Professor Niroshini Gunasekera is a Senior Professor in French at the Department of Modern Languages at the University of Kelaniya. She is also a literary translator who has translated a number of French literary works into Sinhala. In 2004, she won the Prashastha Award at the State Literary Festival in Sri Lanka for her translation of Marguerite Duras' novel barrage, contre, Pacifique. She has translated works of Simone de Beauvoir, Marguerite Duras, Jean-Louis Fournier, Emmanuel Carrère, and David Foenkinos. So in recognition of her service rendered to the teaching of French language and literature in Sri Lanka, she has been awarded the knighthood, which is called Chevalier de l'Ordre des Palmes Académiques by the French government in 2019. This discussion is moderated by our former Vice Chancellor of University of Kelaniya, Professor Emeritus Professor Sarath Amunugama. So now we cordially invite the moderator and the speaker to commence the session. Over to you.
Well, good evening, everyone. Bonsoir. Professor Niroshini Gunasekera, allow me to address you as Niroshini, as I always do, Niroshini. You are a professor in French and specialized also in French literature. When I say French literature, it does mean literature in France, created by French people, as well as literature in other countries where French is spoken or used as a vernacular or official language. Today, we are going to discuss on another specialized area of yours, that is translation. To commence with, Niroshini, may I invite you to define briefly the term translation, please.
Thank you very much, Shevanthi. Thank you very much, Charita. I would like to thank you for letting me talk at this session. And Professor Sarath Amunugama, my lecturer, thank you very much, sir, I'm glad that you are here to moderate the session. Yes, so now you will see to define translation would be, I'm not going to give a technical or scholarly lesson here, but I would first like to brief you on the four main aspects of translation, which are literary translation, which is the translation of fiction, novels, literary works, drama or whatever you call it. Anyway, it's literary literature. And then there is also technical translation, which requires a high level of technical vocabulary. For example, you will be translating manuals, you will be translating brochures, user guides, etc., etc. That is what you call technical translation. Then there is also interpretation, which is done orally, mostly, for example, at courts, when somebody goes to courts. For example, there are French people who are in trouble maybe, and you have to translate the case. That is called interpretation, which is action of explaining the meaning of something. You will not be finding the exact word, but you will somehow give the meaning of what the person is trying to say.
Yeah.
Then,
Madam, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Is it possible to have the full screen of the presentation when you go down?
Yeah.
We see the slide, the full screen. Just on your right-hand side down. Cup icon, there's a cup icon.
Oh, just a minute, Charita. Just a minute, Charita.
That's, yeah.
No.
In your presentation, there's a.
I can't.
Yeah, just there where you zoom, there's minus plus mark, and there's a cup mark there, madam.
Just a minute, I have a small problem with my screen. That is why. Okay, so.
Yeah.
No, Charita, I can't see.
Yeah, and there's a cup icon. See, near that minus mark, there's a cup icon. If you click on it.
Will this be okay?
Yes, now it's better, madam. Thank you very much.
Okay, so adaptation. Adaptation is what you see mostly in the countries as translation, because most people adapt texts. That is, you take the original and then you formulate your own version of it, giving maybe different names or maybe different places. For example, if the story happens in Paris, maybe you can say that it's happening in Colombo. Adaptation, for example, I will give you one good example that most of us know, which is Manutape, Les Miserables by Victor Hugo, which is an adaptation. You have Jana Varjana, who is Jean Valjean. So you don't see the name Jean Valjean there. That is adaptation. So these are the four categories of translation: literary, technical, interpretation, and adaptation. So I think I have answered your question.
I think so, Niroshini. Thank you very much. And now we have arrived at the precise topic of today's discussion, which you have mentioned in the slide. That is literary translation. During the past few years, you have translated and published in Sri Lanka many literary works of French authors. Can you tell us about your translation experience? What I mean by your experience means how many books you have translated. As far as I know, all your translation have been from French to Sinhala. Yes. You mean you have not translated any Sinhala text into French or any English text into French? So is there a reason or reasons for that? Yeah. Then how do you select your authors? I mean, there is a series of questions, Niroshini, excuse me. So try to, if you can remember, try to answer those in series.
So this is the list of the translations that I have done. Simone de Beauvoir, Marguerite Duras, which has been translated as Vasanavanta Maraneyak. Then barrage, contre, Pacifique by Marguerite Duras, Sagarete Vella. Lamont and L'amant de la Chine du Nord, again by Marguerite Duras. Then we have Api Kohede Yanne Tate, Uova Papa by Jean-Louis Fournier, Ohu Enaturu, which is La Douleur again by Marguerite Duras, L'adversaire by Emmanuel Carrère, which has been translated by me as Atmaghatakya, Les Souvenirs by David Foenkinos, Avarjana. These are the covers, and I have translated only from French to Sinhala, which I believe is in my competencies. I always believe that, and I have, just to remind you that I have also done my PhD on translation studies. I have read so many theorists who always defend the fact that a person can translate only into his or her mother language, because there are nuances. There are things that you can say in your own language only. Although your language is really, really good in French, maybe my grammar is very good, I can write perfect French, but certain expressions I might not be able to say in French because I'm not constantly in touch, or I'm not in France. For example, let me give you one good example. When we were in France, my children were going to school. And then I remember seeing a message sent to my son, who was about 11 years old at that time, by a girl. She had written, Je te kiffe. And then, okay, at that time, I did not know the answer, the meaning of that. So I asked a friend of mine, what does this mean? That was when we had the right to see our children's messages. And then my friend said, Je te kiffe means je t'aime. Okay, so a girl was having a déclaration d'amour, big love, declaration of love to my son, right? So, je te kiffe, I would have said, je t'aime. So, see, now when you take that age group, that's how people say, je t'aime. That's how people say, I love you. That's how people say, mama adare. So, I think that you have to be constantly in touch with the evolution of the language to be able to translate into a foreign language. Another thing, very recently, I wrote my own novel. And then lots of people started telling me, why don't you translate it into French? Or why don't you write it in French so that French people also can read it? I said, no, I can't, because I have written it in Sinhala, in my own Sinhala. And then there are 2 translators who have already proposed to me to translate it. And then they have told me to write it in my French, which I will do one day when I have time. I will do it my way, and they will edit it according to the language, register of the language that is demanded by the context. So, no, I don't translate into French, which is my second language. I mean, I don't say that English is my second language, because I think my knowledge in French is far better than my knowledge in English. So French, which is my second language, I don't have the confidence to translate into French. And then how I choose authors is, I'm a very generous person, I must say. Okay, that's a bit of humor. I must say that I always read something and I want to share it. I have been giving my books to people, read this, because that's a nice story. That is only among people who read in French. But then what about the people who don't read in French? I have decided to translate the things that I have liked with the Sri Lankan people who don't speak French. And then I now, as we see, people, the knowledge of the people of the French authors is very limited. They know Victor Hugo, they know Guy de Maupassant, they know only a very few authors. So I thought, why not make them know the new authors? For example, Marguerite Duras is not so new, but if you take Emmanuel Carrère, if you take David Foenkinos, if you take Jean-Louis Fournier, they are very new. So I thought, why not introduce them to the Sri Lankan public? So that was the reason why I have chosen these authors to translate. I think I have answered all the questions.
Yes. Anyway, I must make a personal note. I was very happy that you have selected 5 novels by Marguerite Duras, who was a leading writer during the time of structuralism. That was a concept which dominated the literature, psychology, sociology, everything, all kinds of thinking was structuralized during that period. Anyway, with your explanation, Niroshini, now we have come to the your title of the presentation, of this presentation. May I read it? Bringing home the cultural otherness. Bringing home the cultural otherness. Now, this title implies translation of the narration and also translation of the culture. This is how I understand it. So while developing on this, Niroshini, can you also tell us about the difficulties you encountered in providing a good literary translation and how you managed to overcome such difficulties? I think it's a question which demands a long answer.
Right. Thank you, sir. Right. So I always say, everybody, all the theorists, all the translation study scholars say that translation is a cultural thing. It's not mainly translating words. There is a cultural baggage that is linked to translation. When you translate French literature into Sinhala, we encounter a lot of cultural realities. So that is why we say that translation is a cultural thing. And then without going into much detail, I have 2 quotations by 2 translation studies scholars. One is Antoine Berman, who has said, you can see the quotation in French, but I will read the English one. The essence of translation is openness, dialogue, mixing, and decentering. Openness. You open yourself to a new culture. You maintain a dialogue with a different culture. You mix cultures and you that is decentralizing of culture. One culture, the identity of a culture will be spread to other cultures as well. This is all about openness. You have an open mind when you read translation. You open yourself towards new horizons. Then Lawrence Venuti has said that the translator is no stand-in or ventriloquist for the foreign author, but a resourceful imitator. I have highlighted the important words, a resourceful imitator. So the translator is an imitator who rewrites the original. He or she rewrites the text to appeal to another audience in a different language and culture, often in a different period. This audience ultimately takes priority, ensuring that the verbal clothing the translator cuts for the foreign work never fits exactly. Because when you translate, don't expect, when you read a translation, don't expect a smooth reading. Because you will find foreign elements in your translation, in the translation that you will be reading. If you don't find the foreign elements, that is not a successful translation. You have to find France somewhere. You have to find France in the names, in the context, in the situations. You have to find France. France has to be present in your translation. And then that is why Venuti says that the clothing never fits exactly. You cannot wear it as a smooth, as a comfortable clothing. For example, I have taken the book that you all know, L'étranger by Albert Camus. The first opening sentence was, Aujourd'hui, maman est morte. That has been translated into English by Matthew Ward, who has written, Maman died today. It's not mother, it's not mom, it's maman. But then you see some clumsiness, because a reader who will read in English will find it a bit awkward to find this word mama. But then the translator has insisted to maintain the register, the literary value of the text, because this the person who says it behaves like a child. He always calls the mother mama. Right throughout the novel, you get the word mama. So he must have felt, why change? We must maintain that. And then he also has used the word mama. Now, to continue with my presentation, I also want to show you the essential characteristics of a literary translator. I must say that the translator should possess a very good knowledge of the two languages. For example, let's take French and Sinhala. If we take French and Sinhala, you have to have a very good knowledge of French, but you also have to have a very good knowledge of French, which Sinhala, which I will show you soon. Then also that person should know the source as well as the target culture very well. Let me show you one example of a translation that has failed. Taslima Nasreen has written a book that we got to know as French Lover. She has written it in Bengali, and then it has been translated into English, which is the version that we are familiar with. In this book, Taslima Nasreen has mentioned Rue Saint-Denis, which is a very common place where there are lots of migrants, which has been written by the English translator as Rue, phonetically. Saint-Denis has been written S-A-N-D-A-N-I. Then there is a very famous bookshop called Gibert Joseph. Gibert has been written as Gibar, again phonetically. Then the person parks the car at Saint-Michel, which has been written as Saint-Michel, there's 2-L-E. Then the main character is Benoit Dupont. Benoit, we know that the person in French is called Benoit, and it has been written as B-E-N-O-I-R, Dupont. And then I checked with the French translation of the French Lover, which has been corrected by the French translator. In the French translation, you get Rue Saint-Denis, Gibert, Saint-Michel, and Benoit Dupont correctly. So I tried, in my research, I tried to contact the translator to know whether the mistake has been made by Taslima Nasreen herself, or whether it was this person. Maybe she thought that I was trying to find fault with the translation. She never replied. And then because I got her contact from the editor, publisher, and then that was the only source that they could give me. And then, okay, so I thought maybe it was her mistake. Right. Let me show you some more examples of when you are not aware of the culture. Running in the Family by Michael Ondaatje has been translated as An Heir the Family, 1998. In the source text, we are having a formal dinner, string hoppers, meat curry, etc. So now string hoppers, right, as we all know, string hoppers is what we eat, right? And then it has been translated into French as sauterelle. Sauterelle is grasshopper, tanakolapetta. I think the translator has taken the word hopper, and maybe because in 1998 there was, maybe that person has never traveled to Sri Lanka and there was no steady internet where she could check. So she has just taken the first meaning and written sauterelle. And then in the second instance also, and I stretch my feet to its source as I tear apart my first hopper, has been tout en décortiquant ma première sauterelle. So they have, it was as if you take a grasshopper, tanakolapetta, and you are, taking off the wings to eat what is in the middle. Then Sir John reaches for a hopper, tears off the brittle edges of the dough, and taking the soft, delicious center, holds it out, etc. And the peacock comes and accepts the hopper. So now, according to the translation, Sir John, a very famous character, has taken a grasshopper, removed the wings, taken the middle part of the tanakolapetta and given it to a peacock. And the peacock takes the middle part of the tanakolapetta and goes away, which was you know how I discovered it was at that time in 1998, a French person who came to who was working at that time in Sri Lanka had encountered this book and asked me, "Do you eat insects in Sri Lanka?" I said, of course, I was joking. I said, accidentally, yes, sometimes when they fall into what we eat. And then she said, no, 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 I read this book, and in that book, they say that you eat sauterelle. Then later, long time after that incident, I really encountered it when I was working on this for my research. So see how when you don't know the culture, you tend to make mistakes. Now, come to the second point, which is the freedom of translators. Okay, so we talked about the importance of knowing the culture. You know the culture, but then as a translator, you also maintain some kind of freedom as a translator. I always tell my students, when you read, when you do translations, you have to see the definition. Maybe A-level students cannot do it, but then at the university level, I always tell my students, you have to see don't use a bilingual dictionary, but use a dictionary of definition so that you get the definition and then you know exactly what part will be appropriate to your context. If you take this, I'm giving you an example of my translation of Vasanavanta Maranaya. So, il n'y a pas de mort naturelle, rien de ce qui arrive à l'homme n'est jamais naturel. Tous les hommes sont mortels. Mais pour chaque homme, sa mort est un accident. Et même s'il la connaît et y consent une violence indue. Now say, when the word indue comes, I check the definition. The definition says, déraisonnable, inconvenant, which means arriver à une heure indue, to come at a time that is not convenient to us. In my translation, this is how I have translated. ස්වභාවික මරණයක් නැත. මිනිසාට සිදුවන කිසිම දෙයක ස්වභාවික බවක් නොමැත. මිනිසා මැරෙන සුළුය. නමුත් සෑම මිනිසෙකුටම තම මරණය හදිසි අනතුරකි. ඔහු මරණය හඳුනාගෙන සිටියද, ඊට කැමැත්ත පළ කර සිටියද, එය පැමිණෙන්නේ බලාපොරොත්තු නොවන වේලාවකමය. So I have used the word බලාපොරොත්තු නොවන වේලාවක. To come at a time that is not convenient has been translated by me as බලාපොරොත්තු නොවන වේලාවකමය. Then, bringing home the cultural otherness, according to Lawrence Venuti, the translator's invisibility, which is like the Bible of the translation study scholars, because he was the person who introduced foreignization and domestication of translation. He says, either the translator leaves the author in peace as much as possible and moves the reader towards him. That means you take the translation, you leave the uniqueness, the cultural identity of the source text, and you move the reader towards the cultural identity. Or he leaves the reader in peace as much as possible and moves the author towards him. That means you can adapt your translation to make it a comfortable reading for the foreign reader. He also talks about the distinction between ethnocentric or domesticating translation, which we call in French naturalisation, and foreignizing translation, which we call dépaysement. When you take naturalisation or domesticating, that means you try to find examples that are close to the target culture. Target culture, for example, one good example that I always give, which is when you say curd, kiripani, when you translate it into French, one translator has used the word fromage blanc. Fromage blanc is what you get like in New Dale pots, New Dale, which is also like curd, but you lose to a certain extent the cultural identity of the earthenware pot. And when you go towards the Samaharama, all that is lost. But still, a French person who reads it should be able to relate to what this stuff is. But when you say foreignizing, you leave your curd and try to explain what curd is. And you try to make the Sri Lankan public understand what the French people really eat. For example, if you take something that you eat in France, I will show you an example. Now, just a minute, I will come back to that. Right, so foreignizing. Now, you can, if you take the foreignizing translation, that means you are trying to keep the cultural identity of your original text. You can, there are certain strategies that you can use. One is footnote. Now here you have this sur le bac à côté du car, etc. Il y a une grande limousine noire, etc. And then, then in my translation, I have added a footnote. Excuse me. I have added the footnote that says, Durasගේ නවකතාවල එන වාහන දෙකකි. බලමු එන්න මෙහි එන ලෙවම් බොලේ රථයයි දෙවන්න කළු ලන්සියා රථයයි. මම ඒකට I have taken the pronunciation. There were two types of pronunciation. If you take the Italian pronunciation, it is Lancia. But then I know that the Sri Lankan reader is more familiar with Lancia, so I have taken it. I have taken the Sri Lanka English pronunciation. I have added a footnote. Footnote is one strategy of foreignization. Then, oh, what happened now? Then, there is another strategy, which is to keep the names, because in translation studies, we always say that there is this saying that says how much the name cannot, however much the name is difficult to pronounce, you should keep the names as they are. Now see, there are names like this. In my translation of l'adversaire, Atmaghatakya, I didn't go to adapt them. Luc is Luc, it's not Luke. Luc l'admiral, Cotang, it's not Cotine or anything. Then Prevasang, then Florence. I have kept the names l'admiral, Romang. I have kept the names as they are. That is also a strategy of foreignization. You have the foreign flavor in your reading. When you read, when you know that it's Luc l'admiral, when you know that it's a Roman, when you know that it's Florence, you know that you are reading a French book, translation of a French book. Then there is also an explanation that the translator, because I talked about the freedom of translator. The translator can bring in some kind of explanation. Now here we are talking about Simone de Beauvoir's mother, who was in hospital having a cancer in the intestines, bowel cancer. Intestine cancer, cancer in the intestines. And then the mother was surprised to see that they have given her boudin. On lui avait servi du boudin aux pommes. Du boudin à des malades. In the translation, I have said, "Aita kæmata diyatte boudin," and then within brackets, I have added the explanation. Uru levelin sakasunu sausages. Ha apple babatya. Uru levelin sakasunu sausages will make you understand how inappropriate this food has been to a person who has a cancer in the intestines. Then okay, so the mother is in hospital. The nurse says you have to find a night dress that can be opened from the front. And the daughter, who is a young woman at that time, goes to the shops to buy a night dress. She says, "Lama matin, j'allais acheter des chemises de nuit réclamées par les infirmières." And then the shopkeeper, the girls at the shop, in the shops, see this young lady who has come to buy night dresses and thinks that they are for her. They say, "Vous voulez des nuisettes, des chemises? Babidol me demandait les vendeuses." She shows the ridiculous situation of the shop girls who propose things that are not appropriate. So I wanted, if I had just given the word nuisette or ita keti ragauma, it would have erased the originality of the French culture. That is why I have said, "Pasuda udasana mama satu sevikawan illum kala rෑ ඇඳුම සෙවීමට ගියෙමි. ඔබට අවශ්‍ය nuisette. ඉතා කෙටි නූතන පන්නයේ රෑ ගවුම. එහෙම නැත්නම් baby doll ගවුමක්." I think the mentioning of baby doll ගවුම will express the meaning. Then there is also, that is to say that you can bring in explanation as a translator. Another instance where I have brought in my explanation. Now, in L'Adversaire by Emmanuel Carrère, we talk about a man who is Jean-Claude Romand, who still lives in France, who had a psychological problem, who was a pathological liar, who invented a lie at a certain point in his life. When he was in the first year of his medical college, he says that he passed the exam. And then after that, he had to make up a lie to say that he passed the second year exam, third year exam, fourth year exam, fifth year exam, and then he became a doctor, and then he became a researcher at the WHO, which was a big lie. He never became anything. He was just a man who invented a lie. And then when the truth was going to be revealed, he kills his wife, the two children, his mother, father, and the Labrador dog. So now Emmanuel Carrère writes the story of this man, this killer. And then at the end, he says, "Après 5 heures de délibération, Jean-Claude Romand a été réclusion criminelle à perpétuité." So, réclusion criminelle à perpétuité, පැය 5ක විචාරණයකින් පසු Jean-Claude Romandට තීන්දුව ලැබුණි. උට ලැබුණා වසර 2ක සිර දඬුවමක්. And then I wanted to give an explanation to say that in French, according to French law, the maximum period of penalty that you can give is 30 years. And then out of the 30 years, Jean-Claude got 22 years. So I used my freedom as a translator to bring in this additional information to my text, which is also foreignization, because I add foreign elements, which is I bring in the foreign culture, how it operates in France, into my text. Then there is also, and I talked to you about the footnote. Then I told you there is a second thing, which is domestication. Now, in my first part, maybe the translation was not as smooth as you expect it to be. It could have foreign names, it could have brackets, it could have footnotes. But in domestication, the reading is a bit more smooth. For example, you will see 2 of my book covers. See, La Douleur in Marguerite Duras. In La Douleur, Marguerite Duras talks about how her husband, this is also biographical, how her husband has been taken to a concentration camp during Second World War, and then how she waited and waited and waited until with all other women whose husbands were taken, whose sons were taken. And then La Douleur, I tried my best to translate this into Sinhala, because if you say La Douleur, it means sadness, duka, santapaya, kanagatuwa. I could not find a word that could summarize the meaning that Duras tries to explain in La Douleur. This is the suffering of a woman who was waiting for the return of her husband. So I used my freedom and domesticated the title and wrote Ohu Enaturu. Likewise, in l'adversaire, Emmanuel Carrère, who talks about this killer. And then if you look at the word, it's L apostrophe capital A. It's like the Satan, the biggest evil of all times. So, Satura, it doesn't fit. It's not strong enough. This man, the things that he did cannot be summarized by the mere word Satura. Or I forget the other word. Anyway, so I thought Atmaghatakya, the thing that this man does, I consulted a Sinhala scholar and we came to the conclusion that Atmaghatakya should be the most appropriate term to summarize this word l'adversaire. So you, as a literary translator, you can use your freedom to use the appropriate title. Another example of Jean-Louis Fournier's just a minute. Jean-Louis Fournier's Où on va papa, which I have translated as Api kohe deyanne taatte. Où on va papa, Jean-Louis Fournier wrote in the memory of, he dedicated this book to his two sons who are both handicapped, mentally, physically handicapped. He said, at the beginning of the novel, he says that I'm writing this book for you because I don't want you to be limited to a card of a handicapped child's card, a handicapped person's card. I want your name also to be in a book. Right. So, let me make it a little smaller because I cannot read this like this. What is happening now? Right. Sorry. Right. Okay, that's what I wanted. Right. Just a minute. Just bear with me because I have a problem with my screen right now. So I have to read it like this. Right. Okay, I will make it a bit bigger. Okay. That's a technical problem also with my screen right now. Right. Okay. So now he says, quand je suis seul en voiture avec Thomas et Mathieu, il me passe quelquefois dans la tête des drôles d'idées. Je vais acheter 2 bouteilles, une de butagaz et une de whisky. Et je les viderai toutes les 2. Now, when he talks about his 2 children who are mentally handicapped, who the title Où on va papa comes from the fact that one child continuously asks the question, Où on va papa, où on va papa, où on va papa. Api kohe deyanne taatte, api kohe deyanne taatte, api kohe deyanne taatte. First he says that he started answering the question. And then he saw, after he said at an interview that after 78 times of repeating to him where they were going, he stopped telling him where they were going. So when they are in the car, especially when they are in the car, that he starts asking, Où on va papa? Then he says, Tomai Matthew denna ekka kareke yanakota mata hari amutu situwili enawa. Whisky botelekuයි podi gas cylinder ekui arang dekama bonda hitena. He's so depressed by this situation. So instead of in the buta gas, which I could have explained and made it a foreignizing translation, I adapted it according to the Sri Lankan public and I said podi gas cylinder ekui විස්කි බෝතලයකුයි දෙකම අරගෙන බොන්න හිතෙනවා. And then chaque fois que je reçois un faire-part de naissance, je n'ai pas envie de répondre ni de féliciter les heureux gagnants. Je les trouve arrogants et vulgaires, comme celui qui parlerait des performances de sa Porsche au propriétaire d'une vieille de chez. In Sinhala, මට දරුවෙක්ගේ උපත ගැන කියවෙන කාඩ් එකක් ලැබෙන හැම වාරයකම. Faire part de naissance, I have translated it as, because they send this card. When a child is born, you send a card to say, okay, Matthew born on such and such a date, what is the weight, what is the height, etc. You send it to all your friends. So faire part de naissance, I translated as card එකක් ලැබෙන හැම වාරයකම. ඒකට උත්තරය යවන්න බෑ කියලා හිතෙනවා. සුබ පතන්න හිතෙන්නෙත් නෑ ඒ වාසනාවන්ත දිනුම්කරුවන්ට. මට උඹ පේන්නේ ආඩම්බරකාර පූච්චානංකාරයෝ වගේ. මා අවිනීත යක්කු වගේ. හරියට චූටි පරණ කාර් එකක් තියෙන දුප්පතෙකුට තමන්ගේ අලි කාර් එක ගැන ලොකුකම් කියන එකෙක් වගේ. So instead of translating la Porsche, the car Porsche, or the chevaux, which is the Citroën, I prefer to show that it was the difference between a very sophisticated car and a small car of a poor person. That is again the freedom of a translator, because you have to find the most convenient way to communicate your message. Translation is also communicating the original message in the most appropriate manner. Then, okay, now another one, domestication. In the source text, see, now you see in the background, there's this pixie-like person that you call in French, lutin, right? He says that when he walks with his two children, two sons, they are like lutin. Lutin is this thing. When in my translation, I prefer to adapt it to suit the Sri Lankan culture so that they understand it better. මගේ දරුවෝ දෙන්නත් එක්ක ඇවිදින්න යනකොට මට දැනෙන්නේ හරියට මං අත් දෙකෙන් අල්ලන් ඉන්නේ රූකඩ දෙකක් හරි රෙදි බෝනික්ක දෙන්නෙක් හරි කියලා. උන් හරිම සැහැල්ලු. උන්ගේ ඇටකටු හරි සිව්මැලි. උන් වැඩෙන්නේ නැහැ. මහත් වෙන්නේ නැහැ. අවුරුදු 14ට හරියට අවුරුදු 7 උන් වගේ. උන් හරිම සැහැල්ලු. උන්ගේ ඇටකටු හරිම සිව්මැලි. උන් වැඩෙන්නේ නැහැ. හරියට පුංචි හොල්මන් දෙකක් වගේ. Lutin has been translated by me as හොල්මන්. උන් කතා කරන්නේ ප්‍රංශ නෙමෙයි, අපබ්‍රංශ. උන් ඥාව් කියනවා, ගොරවනවා, බුරනවා, කිචිබිචි ගානවා, කුක්කුකු කියනවා, ඈ කියනවා, බෑ කියනවා, ක්‍රීස් ගානවා. මටවත් උන්ගේ මේ භාෂාව හැම වෙලාවෙම තේරෙන්නේ නැහැ. So if you look at the original, ce sont des petits lutins. Ils ne s'expriment pas en français. Ils parlent le lutin. Le lutin means the language spoken by this lutin, which is not a real language, but he's trying to make it show how absurd what the two children speak. So I thought it would express the meaning better if I say un kata karane France neme, because he says il ne s'exprime pas en français. Un kata karane France neme. Il parle le lutin. Un kata karane France neme, apa France. Right. Then I have found words for each word, each verb that is there. Ou bien il miaule, il rugisse, il aboie, il piaille, il caquette, il jacasse, il coin, il grince. Je ne les comprends pas toujours. Now, so I tried to find a verb that shows that what they say is totally, you cannot understand what the children say. That is again the freedom of the translator. You have to find a word that is convenient to the Sri Lankan public, and also that will express the meaning that what they say is total absurdity. Now, these are the two main strategies that you can use when you translate. Okay, now let me get back to something that I say that cannot be translated, which is, now, despite all the strategies that we use, it can be naturalisation, it can be dépaysement, that means foreignization or domestication. Humor is one element that is extremely difficult to translate. There was also this one, yeah, so humor. Now see, I already called it untranslatability of humor. Now, at a conference, let me tell you this anecdote. Like I always give anecdotes during my lectures. There was this man who had to translate. And then there was a joke, you know, simultaneous interpretation. You have to translate as it goes. Now, at a conference, this man had to translate a joke, but he couldn't translate it. Then what he said was, he said this to the public. He said, il m'est impossible de traduire l'histoire drôle que la personne que j'interprète vient de raconter. Mais s'il vous plaît, aidez-moi. Faites comme si ma traduction était drôle. Merci de bien vouloir rire. I can't translate the funny story that the person I'm translating just told. But please help me. Pretend my translation is funny. Please laugh. You know, you cannot. When spontaneously somebody says a joke, you cannot translate a joke. Let me show you some examples of the untranslatability of jokes, despite the fact that you have strategies like foreignization or domestication. Now, this is not from a novel. It's just here from an advertisement of Nutella. In France, you call it Nutella, but in English, you call it Nutella. You have to take the French pronunciation of it, Nutella. Now see, you have this big jar of Nutella in the middle, and then they have written contre. And then you have the jar of Nutella and plus belle. This has to be read like this. Contenu de la plus belle, which means, I'm sorry, you are the most beautiful when you are naked. So that humor is extremely difficult to translate. First, because you have to maintain the pronunciation of Nutella, the French word, the French way, to get the real meaning. You have to explain this. Otherwise, you cannot. So when you start explaining a joke, you know, you and me, we all know that the effect is gone. Second one, Sri Lankan joke. Can we translate this? You must be knowing this very well. If you find this, if a French person tells you, can you please explain this to me? Can you explain? No, because there is a cultural baggage, artistic baggage behind this whole context. You have to explain that first before you explain the joke, and by that time the person has got sick of the joke and he's not no more interested in the joke. Untranslatability of humor to a certain extent, but in my translations I'm trying to show you that I have managed to translate as much as possible. Take this, for example. Jean-Louis Fournier, in his novel, when he talks about his two handicapped children, he uses what you call the dark humor. Dark humor is he laughs at himself, he laughs at his situations where you cannot laugh at really. They are so pathetic, they are so sad, you cannot laugh at them, but then he tries, he says that it's a privilege, it's his, what does he call it? He says that he has the right to laugh at the problem of his two children because he is the father, because he made them wrongly, right? Now see, do you see any humor in this? Maybe you don't, but then I tried to show the dark humor. Now, Matthew, there's one child who always says, "Uomba papa, uomba papa." There is another child, the other child, Matthew, that was Thomas, and Matthew always says, "Vroom, vroom, vroom," like that, to show that he's driving a car. So, in my Matthew fait souvent vroom, vroom avec sa bouche. Il se prend pour une automobile. Le pire, c'est quand il fait les 24 heures du mois, qu'il roule toute la nuit sans pot d'échappement. Je n'arrive pas à dormir. Demain, je dois me lever tôt. Parfois, il me vient dans la tête des idées terribles. J'ai envie de les jeter par la fenêtre. Mais nous sommes au rez-de-chaussée. Ça ne servirait à rien. On continuerait à l'entendre. Je me console en pensant que les enfants normaux aussi empêchent leurs parents de dormir. Bien fait pour eux. Matthew බොහෝ වෙලාවට කටින් බ්‍රූම් බ්‍රූම් කියලා සද්දයක් කරනවා. එයා හිතන්නේ එයා කාර් එකක් කියලා. සමහරක් වෙලාවට මුළු රෑම කාර් වෙලවනවා. මට නිදා ගන්න බෑ සද්දෙත් එක්ක. හෙට උදේම නැගිටින්න තියෙනවා. I have removed a few sentences that are not related to my what I'm going to say here. හෙට උදේම නැගිටින්න තියෙනවා. වෙලාවකට මගේ හිතට හරි භයානක අදහස් එනවා. මට හිතෙනවා මේ කොල්ල වලලා ජනේලෙන් විසි කරන්න. ඇති වැඩක් තියේ අපි ඉන්නේ පහළම තට්ටුවේ. සද්ද දිගටම ඇහෙයි. මම හිත සනස ගන්න හිතන්නේ සාමාන්‍ය දරුවෝ දෙමව්පියන්ට රැයට නිදා ගන්න දෙන්නේ නැහැ නේ කියලා. හොඳ වැඩේ උන්ට. So you see, if I had translated it in a different manner, if I had used a more standard language for හොඳ වැඩේ උන්ට, එයාලටත් හොඳ වැඩේ, the humor, the frustration of the father would not have been expressed. That is why I have used this language to express this. Another example, il y a aussi ceux qui disent l'enfant handicapé est un cadeau du ciel et ils ne le disent pas pour rire. Ce sont rarement des gens qui ont des enfants handicapés. Quand on reçoit ce cadeau, on a envie de dire au ciel, oh, il fallait pas. Et සමහරු කියනවා ආබාධිත දරුවෙක් කියන්නේ දෙවියන් වහන්සේ දීපු තෑග්ගක් කියලා. ඒ අය එක් කියන්නේ විහිළුවට නෙවෙයි. හැබැයි ඒ අයට ආබාධිත දරුවෝ නැහැ. මේ වගේ තෑග්ගක් දෙවියන් වහන්සේ දෙනකොට අපිට නම් කියන්න තියෙන අනේ මොකට කරදර වුණාද කියලා. You see the frustration of the father and the people who are on the other side of the fence, to whom it is very easy to say it is a gift from God. It is a gift from God. You accept it. But then a father who has two handicapped children would very much say, oh, il fallait pas. Right. Then another one. I'm showing you, I have shown you two examples from Jean-Louis Fournier because there is a lot of dark humor. Okay, now in David Foenkinos Les Souvenirs also there's a lot of humor, but only thing is I could not summarize them here because then you need to quote big paragraphs, which I was not prepared to do. You will get sick of my reading. Now see, in Avarjana, Les Souvenirs, David Foenkinos, the story shows the close link between the grandmother and the grandson. For the birthday of the grandmother, the son takes him to see a man whose painting was found in the home for the aged where the grandmother was. They were fascinated by the ugliness of this picture. It was so ugly that it was fascinating to look at it, to imagine how somebody could paint it. So for the birthday, as a joke maybe, the grandson finds somehow the address of this man and takes the grandmother to see this man who was totally lost. He had even forgotten that he had drawn these pictures. And then when they go and when they talk, this is what happens. Il s'est raclé la gorge. Cela voulait dire que c'était à moi de parler. He says, so that means you have to talk. And then the son says, cher monsieur, Merci vraiment de nous ouvrir. Comme je viens de vous le dire, ma grand-mère et moi, nous sommes vos plus grands admirateurs. Nous ne connaissons pas entièrement vos œuvres. And then there are 3 dots. And then he says, j'écris 3 points de suspension et ce n'est pas pour marquer un silence. L'homme a ouvert la bouche et on aurait vraiment dit que 3 points en sortaient. එයා උග්‍ර පෑදුවා. ඒකේ තේරුම කතා කරන්න අවස්ථාවේ යෙදিলা තිබ්බේ මට කියන එකයි. මහත්මයා තොරෑරියට බොහොම ස්තුතියි. මම ඉස්සර වෙලා කිව්වා වගේ මගේ ආච්චි ඔබතුමාගේ ලොකුම රසිකයෝ. අපි ඔබතුමාගේ සියලු කලාකෘති දන්නේ නැහැ. තිත්තුණා. මම මේ තිත්තුණ ලිව්වේ නිහඬියව පෙන්වන්න නෙවෙයි. ඒ මිනිස්සයා කට ඇරියාම අපිට දැනුනේ ඇත්තටම තිත්තුණක් එළියට ආවා වගේ. So that this is why I say that sometimes humor can be translated when it's not a joke. When it's not a joke, you can translate humor. Right. So I have shown you the examples of foreignization and domestication. And sometimes some things that go beyond translation, which are jokes, mostly the cultural elements. For example, there is the identity of Sri Lankan culture. When you have to translate, you have to use the foreignizing strategy. For example, in a Sri Lankan novel, if you talk about a girl who attains age, to the French public, this will be something that they have never heard of. So you will definitely have to use the foreignizing strategy and explain what it is. What is this? In Sinhala, they say big girl party, they say attained age. But what is this party? Then there is also the example of homecoming in Sri Lanka. After the wedding, the couple goes on their honeymoon and they come back. When they come back, there is another big party. But what is this? That will have to be explained to a foreign public. That is where you have to use the foreignizing element. You cannot foreignizing strategy. If you don't use it, the identity of Sri Lankan culture will be lost. There are certain things that can be naturalized, that can be domesticated, but certain things like this cannot be. For example, if you say memati, udalla, we have the word memati, but then what is a memati? In France, they don't use a udalla. They don't use a memati to dig holes. They use the shovel. So then how are you going to explain this? You might have to say that this is something that you use instead of, or maybe if you want, you can say shovel. That is where you have to choose whether you are going to explain what memati is or whether you are going to give something that corresponds in the French culture. You have to decide whether you are going to strictly maintain the Sri Lankan identity or the French identity, or whether you are going to make the reader comfortable and read quickly without stopping to understand what this is all about. Now, for example, I know very well that in some some French novels, I always bring up this example that if you say il m'a embrassé, il m'a fait la bise. Il m'a fait la bise means you kiss on the cheeks to welcome someone, or il m'a embrassé, which means you really kiss someone. In Sinhala, you can't, if you say when you are talking to a friend. Now, for example, there is a dialogue in your novel. You take that dialogue. Within the dialogue, there is now say there are 2 friends. One girl goes and tells her friend, he kissed me. In French, il m'a embrassé. You don't have to say il m'a embrassé sur la bouche or whatever. You know how French people kiss a couple, right? But in Sinhala, I think to express the meaning, if it is in a dialogue, normally we would have to say, "Ya, mama kiss kara." Parce qu'on peut pas dire එයා මාව සිප ගත්තා. එයා මගේ දේත්තෝන් සිප ගත්තා. ඔන්න දීපා. You don't say it in French. I mean, you don't say it in Sinhala. You have to find a way to express it in Sinhala. So this is why I say that there are certain things that you have to say it the way that the reader understands. If the reader doesn't understand, it is useless that you have translated it. Okay. Right. That's it that I have to say. I think Professor Amunugama might have something to say, or you might have some questions.
Yes, Niroshini, thank you very, very much for this long explanation to the question that I asked you, that is what have been difficulties and how did you overcome those difficulties with examples. Yes. But anyway, actually, I wanted to intervene when you mentioned about this grasshopper story, but I did not want to disturb you. But in fact, that is what you call absurdity. Absurdity, it's a technical term in translation method, but the meaning is the same as what is common in the term absurdity. Here, I remember what had been said by a philologist called Richard Hernandez. I quote, "Perfect equivalence," speaking of translation, of course, he said, "Perfect equivalence is only an ideal, but we can translate a message to a sufficient and acceptable degree." So yes, I remembered when you mentioned about this sauterelle, the grasshopper, and so forth. Absurdity. Thank you very much, Niroshini, for all those things. All what you have said, you have taken very, very important aspects of translation, of text and culture as well. I think we have a little more time left. We will leave it for the listeners to ask their own questions, and then we can answer them. Okay?
Yes.
Charita, can you take it over and see how it goes?
Well, if you have any questions, please type on chat. I will read out to Madam. Yeah. Madam, by the way, when you were explaining this letter set, something came to my mind. It's just a suggestion. This is about the car scene. So if you can go to that slide, please. It's just a suggestion. I don't know whether it would work.
Let's see. You said l'adversaire, right?
Yes, l'adversaire, about, the two cars, Porsche and the Citroën.
No. Citroën and that was not in l'adversaire. That was in
Lancia.
Jean-Louis Fournier.
Jean-Louis. Okay. Oh, I don't know. Let's see.
Just a minute. Where you say where I have used the small car and the
yes, big car. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
There you go. Donc, performance de sa Porsche au propriétaire d'une vieille Citroën. So, I would say like අර Maruti තියෙන කෙනෙකුට Benz එකක් පෙන්නවා වගේ. It hurts, no?
It is, Charita, it is. But I would not use it because I would not bring in a Sri Lankan thing into this. I don't know. According to what I feel, for example, because now say that is a very good expression. And also, as translation scholars, maybe we can also explain why we said it in our introduction. Maybe we can say that we found it more appropriate to use this to show exactly what the original author says. But in my case, personally, I would not bring in the name of the brand name of a car into this, I don't know. I might not, but
because I also don't know like to which limit we can go in domestication is a question.
You can, Charita. There's no problem at all. There's no problem at all. You can, because like, you know, in the translation of Funny Boy, Shyam Selvadore, the translator has even gone into the extent of replacing what is this Famous Five and Nancy Drew by Spirou, like, you know, the French cartoons. So you should be, I mean, because you cannot say that it is wrong. That is a decision that they have taken, that the translator has taken. So we have to respect that decision. I think if somebody says Benz car එකක් මේ මරුටියක් තියෙන කෙනෙකුට Benz car එකක් ගැන කතා කරනවා වගේ, I think it is totally acceptable. It is the freedom that you maintain in your translation. I will never say it is wrong as long as it doesn't express a wrong meaning, because it expresses exactly the right meaning if you say what you say there.
Right. Thank you very much, madam. So we have a question from Nissan Salah. Okay, I'm going to read it out. I would like to know madam's idea about the direct translations or interpretation done by the media, especially through cartoons, where small kids get a wrong idea about the using our own language. Are there any limitations, rules, or filters one should follow, or it has become kind of a headache to the parents?
I understand that very well, but there's no rule or there's no censorship or there's no limit. You know, I will give you a very good example. I know these Korean dramas. The Korean dramas that you see on TV are being translated by very young girls who pass their A-level. A girl told me that they translate. So that means they translate from English to Sinhala. They don't speak Korean at all. So like that, I don't think there is any limitation at all. There are lots and lots of mistakes. For example, I think my students might know this very good example that I always give. There was this, I think we all know Incredible Hulk, this man who gets bigger and bigger when he gets angry. And then he also gets green. And then that was something that I have seen myself. It says, you know, make up now.
I think you were muted, madam. Try again.
Okay, right. Can you hear
Oh,
me?
that's fine. Yeah, we can hear you. Yeah.
What was it that you didn't hear? So I said that you know, I give this very good example of the absurdity of these subtitles and translations and dubbing. You know, there's this Incredible Hulk where this man who gets very big in size, bigger and bigger when he gets angry. And then in the subtitles in English they say one man looks at him because he also becomes green. And then someone says, this is what I call a colored man. Colored man in the sense that he became green. And then the translation, the subtitle says, Meka Kallik. Kallik means a colored man. I'm sure that man must have just taken the first meaning that came in the dictionary. A colored man is an African man. So he has taken that and they have said make a kalli. Then also I saw on Facebook, there was one incident where, you know, we all know that when in a plane, they have a problem, they say Mayday in French. They say that is M''ede. And then now it has become Mayday. Now even English, American, or it's an international term where they say Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. That means may they help me, help me. And then in the Sinhala translation, it was written as Maidine, Maidine. So, you know, you get all kinds of absurd translations because people don't give the same respect that we give to translation. We always, now what I said in the beginning, that you have to have a very good knowledge of the culture, the very good knowledge of the language, all that has been cancelled by this type of translation, Nisansala. I don't think we can do anything about it, because it's a battle that we cannot fight. If you can explain to your children that it is wrong. That is all that you can do. I don't think we can bring in a solution to this. What do you think, Charita? You think do you think we can help it? I don't think.
Yeah, but it depends on the translator's ability. Like, because in TV channels, they have not been like, paid to do like, really huge task. For them, the popularity is more important than the quality of work. Only in academia, like, professors would be interested in, having an accurate translation, whereas TV channels, they would go for this popularity and then the adaptation, rather translation. I think that's where, if they want to say something better, they would go for that than finding the accurate translation. Yeah.
And sometimes even in dialogues I have seen where I just felt one day I was thinking whether one person translates the dialogues of one character and another person translates the dialogues of another. I don't know, because it doesn't correspond. When one person says one thing and then when the other person responds to it, you normally take the same word, le memo. But here you don't take the same word, you say something totally different, a totally different verb. So you feel that the person who wrote the dialogue has not seen what the answer was going to be. There's that absurdity of translation in on screen.
I think can I intervene here, Charita? Just to give my opinion on this. I think you're absolutely right, because I have witnessed, or I have heard so many absurdities. Again, I will call them absurdities like that. So, there is what you call the register of language. You use that, Niroshini, the register of language. Register in the sense level, but it is not the level in the knowledge of the language. The type of language you use with different people. I mean, you speak with your friend. You use certain terms and ways and means of speaking that you don't follow the same when you speak with your parents or with your teachers. So the people do not understand this difference of register. And also the fact that whatever have been, let's say the lowest, we call it slang, or what you call the filthy language, it will, for what is called filthy today, identified as filthy today, will be something common in 10 years' time or 15 years' time. That evolves, the register evolves. So I think that people are not conscious about these things. That's why I said it becomes very inappropriate. You see that it's very inappropriate in using. That's also one of the problems in translation.
Yes.
So we have a question from Tarush. It's related to what Professor Amarkam said. He wants to know if we can change the style of language of the original text in our translation. For example, can we use an informal language even though in the original the text is in a formal language?
Can I answer that question, sir, please?
Yes, you will answer that question. Yes, yes.
Yeah, I want to tell you that you cannot. You have to absolutely respect the language of the original text. For example, if you take Camus l'étranger of Camus, you cannot write it in another language but what is demanded by the original author. Example, I will take the example of my Lama, Marguerite Duras. You cannot translate it into another type of language. You cannot reconstruct it, because it is also a steel, you say a steel sakade, that means like a very broken style. It's not, even in the original, it's not a smooth type of style. But in translation, I have to maintain that broken style to be in rapport with the original text, because this is a literary genre. This is a type of literature. So if I cannot reconstruct that type of literature in my translation, the person who reads the translation should know what type of language the original author used and why that original author belonged to that particular category of literary genre. So I know, strictly no, definitely no. You have to have, that is the minimum respect to the source text. Okay, so that's
in other words, I think in a text, everything carries a meaning. It is not only the récit or the story or what is narrated, but
yes,
even the style, and this again, I repeat, the register, everything carries a meaning. That's very, very important.
Yeah, you cannot rewrite your own text. Then you might as well go and write your story.
Yeah. I think there's a question from Madam Kamani related to this. How important is the understanding of culture more than the two languages?
It's not more than the two languages. It is also culture, 50% language, 50% or 100% culture, 100% language. You have to understand the culture to understand the proper meaning of what they say in French. Otherwise, you cannot translate properly. The biggest problem of this, you know, let me also give you one good example that my students, if they are here, they must have got sick of hearing this example. Once I read in a translation, you know, we all know Coco Chanel. Coco Chanel is, you know, this perfume, Chanel numero 5. Coco Chanel is a person, fashion designer, or what you call stylist. So Coco Chanel, right? So you write it as CHANEL, Chanel. And then in a Sinhala translation, the person who did not know who this Coco Chanel is, okay, within brackets, now I have a cat called Coco Chanel. That has nothing to do with my translation. I just brought it in. So this Coco Chanel has been translated into Sinhala as Coco Nalika. That is one good example to show how much you have to know the French, the culture, the source culture to do a proper translation. If you don't know who Coco Chanel is, then that person has even corrected it, auto-corrected in, he said, CHANEL as CHANNEL, which is the Nalika. So that is, I think, Professor Kamani, you will see that this is why I say that the knowledge of the culture, source culture, is extremely important to translate.
I think, Madam, that question must have originated from the fact that, like, there were French translations in Sri Lanka done by other translators who had no idea about the French language. So what do you think? Can you like...
Charita, let's not talk about this, because, you know, most of the translations that are here have been done by translations, the English translation of the original.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's not a translation. I mean, I won't call it a translation because that's a filter. There is the filter of the English text. So if the translator of the English text has made a mistake, then the mistake gets carried to the Sinhala translation, because you haven't seen the original text. So I think if we are talking about translation, let's talk about the source text and the target text, and not with the translations that come with the filter in the middle.
Right. Then there's a practical question from Jayoga. I think she's an A-level student. Can we still use the freedom of translation when translating text in examinations?
You cannot. You cannot. Jayoga is a French teacher. She's not an A-level student. She's a teacher. Jayoga, no, you cannot, because that is a very strict artificial context. You know that you are not training your student to become a translator at that level. For example, not at the exams where you are training your students to sit. You know, you have to go by the sentences, because otherwise you cannot, if you do what I'm doing, the jugglery that I'm doing here, you can, so for example, if the perfect idea is there, yes, but then I think it's better if you train your student to be very close to the source text in your translation, because this is a very artificial context. You are not expecting too much from them, because if you tell your students, okay, do what this person has done here, then they will not have any limits, then you cannot control them. Then they will say, okay, they say this, then we also can write our own translation. Because to tell you, Jayoga, I have the experience of working on translations with my students. There was the incident where there was one student who hated to translate it according to the, even when you can translate. Say, for example, quand je me promène avec mes deux garçons. When you can say, when I walk with my two sons. That person, and mage daruwa dennath ekka mama ඇවිදින්න යනකොට, that person would translate it as mage daruwa denna, I don't know, that person would change the places of the sentences altogether. That person never wanted to do an easy translation. So you might have cases where your students will want to experiment with language. No, let them do that when they come to the university or after the university. Teach them to do a translation that is transparent, that shows all the, because they will then forget certain details. Because in a translation, all details have to be there. When you say quand je me promène avec mes deux garçons, if that person says when I walk with my sons, no, you have forgotten one element. Deux garçons, two sons. When they start playing around with language too much, they tend to forget. Because I mean, don't expect them to have the same maturity that I have or mature translations have, translators have. So tell them to go by their text and translate into French, into Sinhala or English, preferably into Cinghalais if they can, because sometimes by translating into English they make mistakes in tenses, etc. That will make them lose marks. But the best thing would be to go by the text and see, check whether you have added all the details of the source text into your translation. Is my answer okay, Jayoga?
Okay, madam. Thank you very much.
And madam, we have a basic questions. She says, can you suggest some novels or short stories in French for grade 12 students to improve their vocabulary and etc. as a help?
I think for the time being, they have a literature book, right? I think if they concentrate on that, because I think the biggest problem that you have is you don't have enough time. I think if you really concentrate on that, that will make you increase your vocabulary and your comprehension texts, whatever comprehension text that your teachers will choose. Now, I think let's not deviate our, translation work to A level.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you all have any other questions? Those were the only questions.
I think we are right on time.
Yeah, we have 2 more minutes.
Yeah, 2 more minutes.
So, madam, according to you, like one last question, what should be the main goal of the translator? Is it like bringing the cultural otherness to the reader, or is it like passing across that literary message? Because after all, literature is universal. because we still read necklace from maybe the Sinhala or the English one. We have got the essence of that without absolutely not knowing anything about French culture back then as students. I don't know, what are your thoughts on?
I think translation has evolved, right? Because those days we did, like, again, let me tell you that the most of the translations have been done from English. But then, yes, like you say, we knew necklace through translations before we knew French. I think translation is bringing the cultural otherness. To me, it will always be bringing the cultural, because in the message that you give, the French message itself is cultural. You listen to the French radio, that is the culture that you want to bring. If you go to France, you listen to the French radio and then you talk about that in your novel. I think that is the cultural otherness. I think it is always rich if you bring in the cultural otherness rather than erasing it and making it universal. Making it universal is translating. Translating means translating a text that has been written in another culture to a different culture. That is how you make the culture, the reader, richer by introducing him or her to a new culture. I think it is always, to me, it will always be a cultural matter. Sorry.
Right. So with that answer, our session is over. Let me give the word of thanks. So first of all, I would like to thank Senior Professor Niroshini Gunasekera for this wonderful session on the translation of French literary work into Sinhala. Thank you very much, Madam, for those valuable and useful explanation on translations. We really appreciate your volunteer participation. We also thank the moderator of this session, Professor Sarath Amnugama, for his valuable contribution and bringing out this idea of organizing this conference. Let me briefly thank everybody who helped to organize this event. Mr. Bruno Dupart, Director of Alliance Française de Kotte, Ms. Dilanti Jinendra Singha, Administrative Coordinator, for partnering with ASLAEF in organizing this event by providing their Zoom channel for free. But unfortunately, we could host only 100 participants. So those who did not get the chance to come into the Zoom room, we will be sharing the Google Drive link so you can watch it leisurely. Please do not hesitate. We will provide the link. And then the Executive Committee of ASLAEF for bringing out this idea of organizing virtual session and successfully executing it. Thank you very much. Last but not the least, all the participants who joined online and stayed throughout enthusiastically. So your participation matters a lot. So with that thanking note, let me conclude this session. Have a nice evening. Stay safe. Au revoir.
Thank you very much, Sarita.
Thank you, Niroshini.